This program provides education, not advice. Sponsors pay a fee for endorsements and interviews. See the truthayf.com disclosure page for details.
This is where technology, innovation, and personal finance come together.
This is the truth about your future with Rick Edelman.
Invesco QQQ is proud to sponsor The Truth About Your Future, and even prouder to provide access to innovation for the last 25 years. Invesco QQQ. Let's rethink possibility. Invesco Distributors, Inc.
It's Friday, December 6th. On today's show, are paper checks finally outdated? Plus, a conversation with Mark Rothmeyer, the CEO of the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, about the newest developments in the fight against Alzheimer's. Are you still writing paper checks? On average, we write 30 checks per person per year. That's about 3 a month. That's twice as many checks that they write per person in France. That's the number 2 check-using country in the world. Most European countries require people to use electronic payment networks. Why are we still writing checks? Check fraud is 400% higher than it was a year ago, according to FinCEN. That's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. Banks and credit unions lost almost $700 million last year to check fraud. It's so easy to get scammed with paper checks. It's called double presentment. I wrote about this in my book, The Truth About Crypto, back in 2017. It's because of double presentment that Bitcoin and digital assets are so welcomed by businesses. Figure this. Somebody gets a hold of your check. They use it to create a fake check. Well, wait, how do they get a hold of your check? They just steal it from a mailbox. How low-tech is that? Once they have your fake check, they use ordinary household chemicals to wash out the amount you wrote in and the payee you wrote in, but they leave your signature intact. Then they write in their own name and amount, and then they deposit the check at an ATM or they use a mobile deposit using their smartphone. And then as soon as they deposit the check, they quickly withdraw the cash, and they grab the cash before the bank even realizes that the check is fake. Banks are starting to fight back. JP Morgan Chase is freezing accounts. Fidelity has now put long holds on mobile deposits. They're even prohibiting some customers from depositing more than a low $1,000. All this leaves you with a headache too, because the money was drained from your account. It can take months to get it all sorted out for you to get your money back. That's assuming you ever do. Stop writing paper checks. It's the 21st century. If you haven't noticed, you should be using Zelle, which is the banking system's version of electronic checks, or PayPal, or Venmo, debit cards, credit cards, or, oh my goodness, wait for it, Bitcoin. Coming up next, my conversation with Mark Rothmeyer, the CEO of the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation.
We'll be back with more here on The Truth About Your Future. Stay with us.
What's your boldest, truly ambitious life goal? Everyone has one, and everyone deserves a way to get there. That's why State Street offers a wide variety of ETFs to give all investors access to the market and the chance to reach their goals. Like with SPY, where you get the power of the S&P 500 in a single trade. Wherever you're heading, getting there starts here with State Street.
Before investing, consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. Visit ssga.com for a prospectus containing this and other information. Read it carefully before investing. SPY is subject to risks similar to those of stocks. All ETFs are subject to risk, including possible loss of principal. Alps Distributors, Inc. Distributor.
Support for The Truth About Your Future with Rick Edelman is made possible by Invesco QQQ. A quarter of a century ago, Invesco QQQ reimagined how people invest by providing access to the most innovative companies on the NASDAQ 100, all in one ETF. With Invesco QQQ, investors saw all the possibilities that innovation could deliver. So what's on the horizon for the next 25 years? See for yourself. Tap into the companies remaking the future. Invesco QQQ. Let's rethink possibility. There are risks when investing in ETFs, including possible loss of money. ETF risks are similar to those of stocks. Investments in the tech sector are subject to greater risk and more volatility than more diversified investments. The NASDAQ 100 index comprises the 100 largest non-financial companies on the NASDAQ. You can't invest directly into an index. Before investing, consider the fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. Visit Invesco.com for prospectus containing this information. Read it carefully before investing. Invesco Distributors, Inc.
You're listening to The Truth About Your Future. I'm Rick Edelman, and I'm very happy to bring back onto the program Mark Rothmeyer. He is the CEO of the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. I'm pleased to be on the board of ADDF. Mark, great to be with you, my friend.
Oh, always good to be here, Rick, and we are pleased to have you on the board of the ADDF.
So there is, thankfully, finally, I would say, real progress being made in the fight against Alzheimer's after decades and tens of billions of dollars of a lot of effort, but not a lot to show for it. We're on the cusp now these days. Would you say that?
Completely. In the last 2 years, we've entered into a new era of Alzheimer's treatments. For the first time, we're seeing approved 2 new treatments by the FDA, one from the folks at Biogen and Eisai, another one from Lilly, that are just coming to market now that are what we call modestly effective. And equally, and probably actually more than equally, what comes after that has us very, very excited.
So you say, what comes after that? What are you referring to?
So there are new treatments in the pipeline, right? Things going through phase 1, phase 2, into phase 3. Over the next 3 to 5 years are going to come to market, and they're going to make the number of treatments more robust for patients. But Rick, I don't want to undervalue what's happened here in the last 2 years. A year ago, Biogen Eisai got their drug approved by the FDA. Just this past year, it's Eli Lilly. These are what are called monoclonal antibodies. And what that simply means is that one of the telltale signs of Alzheimer's is you have plaques and tangles in your brain. These are both drugs that are delivered intravenously. But what they do is they remove the plaques and tangles, but most importantly, they help with cognition. And up until now, Rick, we saw drugs that were removing plaques and tangles, but not helping with the cognition. So these 2 breakthrough drugs that have just come to market are now doing that. And they are what we call modestly effective. That's about 30% of the people who take them get some kind of a benefit from it. And what we're seeing in that benefit, Rick, the people who are in the clinical trials, they were in the early stages of their cognitions just starting to go fuzzy, what we call MCI, mild cognitive impairment. And what these drugs showed was that over time, it slowed down the progression of that. Any of us who've had a loved one with dementia and Alzheimer's or any of the related dementias know that something starts out and then it starts going really fast and we lose the humanity of our loved ones, right? These 2 drugs are showing that it can push it out, much like you see in these cancer drugs that come out. Say, hey, you're going to live for another 3 to 5 years at least, right? What these drugs are starting to show is that we can push out your cognitive delay by months into years.
That is a big improvement compared to what has happened in the past. Talk about the availability of these drugs today and their cost.
So on the availability of these drugs, it's an interesting story. It's an interesting business story. Biogen and Eisai have been the first to market. This is a jointly marketed drug. Eisai is a Japanese company. Biogen's an American company. They've got about a year's head start on it, but it's rolling out slowly. And part of that is the difficulty you have when you have a Japanese and American company working together in the United States too. It's a little bit more cumbersome than if it just was one company putting it forward. There is great expectation now that Lilly has its approved drug. What we're seeing with Lilly is they're just getting started. They're being very realistic about it and saying, well, you're not going to see a lot of numbers from us till the beginning of next year. We just came from meetings with the folks from Lilly, and you can see week to week, they're rolling it out and they're starting to build up numbers. But for the general public, by the end of next year, you're going to see these drugs readily available. They're done through intravenous centers. So there's some complexity to the logistics of all of this. Lilly rolls out drugs very, very well. And just in terms of making the right relationships with the doctors on the front line, making sure they're connected to the right facilities to deliver the treatment. And then also there for the regulation, that it's safe, and the reimbursement. And that gets into your cost question. The cost that we're seeing originally from these, about the cost of cancer drugs, going to be in that $15,000 to $25,000 a year. Having said that, you can rest assured lots of things are being set up to help patients with the cost of these drugs. There will be things like co-pays, all the stuff that you see in the cancer drugs. It's very, very, very comparable in cancer drugs.
So it's important, to recognize that we're talking $1,500 a month, perhaps, for a lot
Yeah.
of folks, and that's
Yeah.
just out of the economic realm of
Right.
most Americans. And that's the
Right.
problem with Alzheimer's, is that it's indiscriminate, regardless of your wealth or lack thereof. You're as likely to get it as not, and so we really do have to figure out how to make these drugs available and affordable.
Yeah. And Rick, that gets into, and this is a big topic right now, the diagnosis. So let me even back up. From what I do, and you see this very clearly, the science comes first, right? The regulation comes second, and the reimbursement comes third. And with all these years of failures in Alzheimer's, it was almost like forgotten about, right? And it's interesting because there is a PET scan that can diagnose you for having these plaques and tangles, telltale sign of Alzheimer's. And in fact, it's this PET scan you need to take before you ever get on the drug. And it is this PET scan that kind of monitors your progress on the drug. Up until a year ago, that PET scan was not reimbursable. And depending on where you were in the United States, it'd be $5,000 to $6,000 just for the initial PET scan. What's happened now is that 2 summers ago, CMS came through and said, we're going to reimburse. If you get onto these drugs, we're going to reimburse you for those PET scans, right? So it's
Wow,
kind of taking that cost.
that's huge.
It is, but there's a bigger story here, because I think, as you're aware, but maybe many folks who follow you on the podcast aren't, is where blood tests are beginning to come to market and rush to market. And the ADDF, we invest in several of these new blood test companies called by the name of C2N, Fuji Radio, AlzPath. And what in these clinical trials that are going on, they're doing the PET scans, but they're also running blood tests side by side, because, and this gets into, Rick, your point about how can we democratize the opening up and the use of these new treatments that are coming? Well, first and foremost is you got to know, are you diagnosed? Are you at risk of this, as a gateway to see the drugs? And these blood tests come in at maybe more like $400 to $600 a blood test versus $5,000 to $6,000 for the PET scan. And what we'll absolutely see by the end of next year is CMS approving, the FDA is regulating these blood tests. They're going to have an FDA approval, and then there's going to be a reimbursement for these blood tests. And that is then going to open up where you can go to your primary care physician and say, hey, I want to get this test to tell me, am I at risk? And that's going to start moving the system, because part of this with cost also comes with volume. And once you can democratize it so that everybody, no matter who you are, where you live, that the cost of this gate of entry is low enough that it's going to bring the pressures that bear to bring costs of everything down, right? To do.
So you'd mentioned earlier phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You're referring to clinical trials.
Correct.
For those who are not familiar with how drugs get tested, evaluated, approved, talk about the different phases that are involved.
Yeah, and it's the part that comes with being the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. You know, there's a process of a drug getting to market, right? And it starts with some crazy idea a bench scientist has in a lone molecule, right? And the ADDF came into existence 26 years ago. It was, how do you take that interesting idea that's in a lab and, going from bench side to bedside to a patient, right? What you do with that, you take that molecule and you go into preclinical studies, typically animal model studies, and then you get them into what's IND enabling. If it shows enough progression, how can you take that preclinical idea and get it into humans? And that into humans is phase 1. And the only thing phase 1 does is it's safe, right? We don't want to be taking anything forward that's not safe. So that's phase 1. Moves into phase 2 is, okay, we know it's safe, but do you get target engagement? For instance, these new drugs that have come on, it's to remove plaques and tangles. So first, is it safe? Phase 2 is, okay, is it starting to remove the plaques and tangles, right? And phase 3 is there a definitive benefit of taking this drug versus not taking the drug? And that's phase 3. big, huge studies that take a look at, they put part of the people in the trial on the drug, part of the people in the trial not on the drug, and then you do a comparison. And that's what you get the FDA approval from. So phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
So separate from Alzheimer's drugs specifically, but generally speaking, how long does it take to go from the bench in the lab all the way through phases 1, 2, 3 into the bedside, as you described, using the drug for patients? How long does that often take, and how much does that often cost in drug development?
Right. So typically, and in the past 20 to 30 years, and then Rick, you start looking at the overwhelming majority are failures that never make it, right? So that you go. And we used to say hundreds of millions, but the truth is it's billions to get it there. And it's interesting for the ADDF, here we are, is this charity started by the Lauder family just to put money in this, go to bench to bedside and really get it out of the lab into phase 1 and phase 2, and then have it show enough promise that pharma comes through and takes it to the end, right? So that niche for us is really that phase 1 and phase 2. Is it safe? Can we show proof of concept that this drug actually engages its target and then to come through? So first of all, there's a great advantage in what we do. We're very nimble. We're very quick. We get in, we get out, right? And we stay with something if we think there's scientific promise. The interesting thing is there's something called the valley of death in drug development. And it used to be great idea at the bench, but getting it into humans, good luck. And pharma 30 years ago put a lot of money into those things. They don't anymore. They really stay and wait at that phase 3 and then pull through from phase 2. So that first, there's now 2 valley deaths. There's a first valley of death that get it into the humans. There's a second valley of death that we're really serving the niche now, which are these some really interesting phase 2 ideas. They're safe. They're starting to show target engagement, but these aren't they're phase 2As. They're not super powered, right? 50 people in the study, 150 people, 200 people in the study. And for pharma to really get interested, you got to lift those numbers up to be higher than that, right? So we got into this focused on the first valley of death. I don't think we realized it was going to be a second. But I will say this, and if you compare it to cancer, I often say that Alzheimer's is about 20 years behind cancer's development. And if you look at cancer right now, particularly the blood cancers, if you get one of those, first of all, there's so many protocols and treatments that are out there. And often, because the oncology is so developed in our society, you'll be looking for those phase 2 drugs because there's all this new stuff coming out that is more than directionally correct now. So pharma's really jumping on these ideas. With Alzheimer's, we're just at the beginning of that, just at the beginning of it.
And that's why you're talking about the pipeline being pretty exciting, that all of this has been going on for so many years that
Correct.
you're starting to reach, the so-called end of the tunnel.
Correct. And what we see here, first of all, Rick, I talk about this all the time. We're of a similar generation in age, the two of us. And I look at, for me or you, if we get cognitively fuzzy tomorrow, there are things you can do. And I want to come back to that, which were 5 years ago, no one was talking about, right? And it's not just the 2 new treatments I'm talking about. Second thing is I have children in their early 30s, adult children in their early 30s, and there's no question that they're going to have, by the time they get 60 to 70, and if their cognition goes fuzzy, they will have multiple options. And then I'm blessed also to have 2 grandsons, very young grandsons with a granddaughter on the way. There's no question that in their lives, they're going to have protocols. And they will be going for a physical when they're 40 years old. They're going to get a blood test. They don't even know what it's for. And the blood test is going to be saying, are they at risk for cognitive issues down the line? And if they are, they're going to be put in protocols, prevention, lots going on in prevention. And they're also going to start looking at, depending on how they're showing through these tests, might there be some treatments they would start earlier just to push this out from never happening? And you think about that. You think about heart disease, right? And if you have heart disease in your family, you start altering your diet, right? Maybe you get on a statin. And you're going to see that in Alzheimer's. The science is there.
So it's really exciting that we're beginning to anticipate the time when we're going to be able to say that we've made as much progress on Alzheimer's as we have. in heart disease, respiratory illness, cancers, and other deadly, dreadful diseases. We're not quite there yet, but the progress is now beginning to reveal itself. Explain to folks what ADDF is, the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. We're talking with Mark Rothmeyer, the CEO of ADDF. You mentioned the Lauder family is the family of Estee Lauder, who have really spearheaded this organization, have made immensely generous contributions to it. What you do is different than other Alzheimer's organizations or most nonprofits. You're doing what you call venture philanthropy. Explain this, because it's fascinating.
And let me start just with the Lauder family, Estee Lauder, who everybody knows. And think of this, Estee in the 1940s went out to department stores with cosmetics she developed in her kitchen sink with her husband, Joe, and sold them into department stores. And now you have this multi-billion dollar worldwide company. And think about a woman who did that in the 40s. And as she ages toward the end of her life, she got Alzheimer's, and her sister had Alzheimer's. And before she passed, she said to her two sons, Len and Ron, do something about this. And they decided that they were going to spend money on science, but this translational science, get from bench to bedside. And they also decided they weren't going to give out grants. What they were going to do is make investments, and whether it was an academic or a biotech that says, look, we'll give you money to work on this particular molecule or this particular diagnostic device, and we'll have a contract. And if you see any kind of deal flow from this idea, ADDF will get a percentage of that, of which we have to recycle right back into the science again, right? So the time when they came up with this 27 years ago, kind of revolutionary thinking that you could think about venture philanthropy, right? That's kind of like this, you put these two concepts together.
And it makes perfect sense, because traditionally nonprofits would fund this academic research. Somebody was going to get rich if it succeeded. They were going to form a new co. They were going to sell it to Wall Street or to a big pharma company. They'd get rich, and the organization that raised the money from donors as a philanthropic activity, just, they were good guys making a donation. But now you're recognizing, if you guys are going to get rich off of the science that you're able to build thanks to our donation, we're going to get a piece of that action, and we're going to use the money to fund the next guy. And they're
Correct. Completely. And I'll give you a great example of this. You heard me talk about this PET scan, right? Mm-hmm. This is a PET scan. The idea came out of a professor at University of Pennsylvania 15 plus years ago, called up the ADDF, said, I have a crazy idea and nobody will fund it. And it was, could you trace plaques and tangles in the brain? And we put money into that. And this idea at U of Penn, we helped spin it out to a company called Avid Pharmaceuticals, diagnostic company, who several years after that were bought by Eli Lilly. And now this is the PET scan that finally led to these two first breakthrough drugs. And I can tell you something, Rick, it's interesting. We get checks every quarter based on the use of that PET scan. And it's interesting. Remember I told you about it a year or so ago, that PET scan has now gotten approved for reimbursement. And we've seen our residual checks go up because now it's being used, right? And so the money we get from that, we've put into things like blood tests. And now there are blood tests that are about to replace the PET scan, right? So you can see this kind of pay it forward into the science mentality that I'll tell you, I take great joy in being able to be a CEO of an organization that does this. But, the genius of this came a quarter of a century ago from the Lauders, from Howard Filliter, co-founder and chief science officer, that we want to do this a different way. And the whole thing that stimulated was really, could we get academics to move quicker on their ideas? And the other thing is that, could we attract biotechs into this space when there weren't a lot before that, right? And now you see it.
We'll continue our conversation when we return here on The Truth About Your Future.
At Schwab, how you invest is your choice, not theirs. That's why when it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices. You can invest and trade on your own. Plus, get advice and more comprehensive wealth solutions to help meet your unique needs. With award-winning service, low costs, and transparent advice, you can manage your wealth your way at Schwab. Visit schwab.com to learn more.
Welcome back. The Truth About Your Future continues.
So talk about the numbers. How much money has ADDF raised? How much have you invested? How many different companies have you, talk about all that.
So we've invested over $300 million, about 150 companies. But again, we have a portfolio of academics about twice that size. I think what we're most delighted in that is seeing it's probably about 3, 4, 5 dozen, 3 or 4 dozen now academics we've spun out to biotechs. But Rick, I say this all the time. Our funding model is based on 3 things. Find really innovative science. I once said, and I think you and I attended a similar conference a couple of years ago with the Milken Institute. And I once said to Mike Milken, we de-risk things. He says, oh no, Mark, you're all about risk. So that innovation side is that risky space that others for-profit capital isn't touching. So we go in there and do that. We stay with it. And we feel a moral obligation to stay with it if the science continues to move forward, even if it's not ready to be a company, even if it doesn't have the right management team around it, because there's something there in the science and we'll stay with it to keep it going during that time. And the last piece is anything that comes back, we immediately put back in the science. And it's interesting because in this time, we'll end this year, the total somewhere between low 30s to 35 billion we've seen as a return on investment. But the interesting thing about that, Rick, is I would say that up until 2019, at best, the return on investment was a rounding error in our financials. And what we saw in 2019, and COVID led this, a lot of money went into the life sciences, and we saw the programs we were funding benefit from that. Do IPOs, do joint ventures, get bought. So we see money on those things. And now we're seeing more like 4 to 5 million a year. And it's being driven by a couple of things. One, the companies or the ideas we're funding, they're moving into phase 2. So they just become more attractive than that. But I would also tell you, Rick, this would be too bold a statement, but you'll get it. And your listeners will get it. It's almost like we're making a market, right? So as we keep these ideas alive and they move forward, and as pharma now has the first breakthroughs, and this is an important point, these breakthroughs, I said, 30, 35% effective, which means there's 65% that's still open. And what the clear thing is, and we just came back from a week-long conference in Madrid, this is going to move to combination therapies. So there's something called the biology of aging. As you and I sit here, we're both aging, we age differently, right? It's genetics, it's vascular issues, it's our mitochondrial systems, it's inflammation, how we respond to it, it's our own biology. And what we've been funding the better part of the last 10 years is pharma came in for these plaques and tangles, so we stopped funding it, get it to pharma. So we have funded these 7 or 8 different pathways that people age. And because what this is ultimately going to be, yep, you need that monoclonal antibody, but maybe you have issues with inflammation. So coupled with an inflammation drug might be 60 to 70% effective for you. For me, it might be kind of a slowed down mitochondrial system. So maybe my combined therapies with the monoclonal antibody is that mitochondrial drug. If you think about it, the plaques and tangles are like a scab. And something's caused that scab underneath. And these biology of aging pathways are what's causing that. So we're looking at this, you need both. And so there's a whole age, we literally just came out of a scientific meeting in Europe. And there's been all this great excitement about these first new drugs. But the biggest second thing that came out of it is Alzheimer's between now and the end of the decade is entering into combination therapies. And that's huge because it's going to really open up the field to ultimately be a precision medicine approach.
And I would think it's in addition to combination therapy is personalized medicine, is recognizing that we are all unique and we need these cocktails. It's not just these individual pills, one at a time.
And think about it, right? I mean, it's really for all disease states, but think about it for Alzheimer's for some. It's multifactorial. It's complex. There's a reason it's taken this long, right? It's very complex. So how do you do that? The other thing that is going to become a significant part of it, prevention. So, Rick, we know there's a fellow board member at ADDF, Mia Kivipelto. She's in Stockholm, Sweden at the Karolinska Institute. Doc, she is the foremost worldwide expert on the prevention of Alzheimer's. And she does a worldwide study that's in over 60, I think she's going on 70 countries now, except for the Arctics. Every continent, she has these studies going. What it's looking at in very different and diverse socioeconomic, and racial, and ethnic cultures is what can you do to push out or delay Alzheimer's? And there's no big secrets here. It's what's good for your heart is good for your head. So things like a Mediterranean diet, very, very good. Things like, Rick, learning new things, just ongoing, keeping your mind fully educated. Cardiovascular exercise, very, very good. That goes on. Also, treating chronic disease, particularly around inflammation and vascular issues. And what they have shown in this worldwide finger study is that you can be delaying and pushing out cognitive decline by up to 40%. And it shows increased executive function, increased recall, just all sorts. That came through about 5 or 6 years ago, and the data is just getting stronger and stronger. So we're looking at now, we actually are beginning studies on this. How do you take one of these monoclonal antibodies and just put it with a prevention lifestyle and see what that gives you, right? How do you take one of these monoclonal antibodies and add on an inflammation drug or add on a vascular drug, right? There are repurposed drugs that show some interest. We're doing a clinical trial right now with metformin with the lifestyle intervention. Metformin is a diabetes drug, right? So all of this is starting to come now. It's an exciting time.
If somebody wants to learn more about the work you're doing at ADDF or wants to talk with you about supporting the organization through charitable donations, how can they learn more?
Just Google ADDF and you'll see our website. Website has a couple of interesting things I would point out. All of this, first of all, it's a great website of what's the latest going on with the drugs and the blood testing. We'll get that. There's also a wonderful part of that site, and you can just Google this, called Cognitive Vitality. And this is funded by an anonymous donor. And Rick, we always hear about all these supplements that can help your brain health, right? That it's over the counter anywhere you go these days. And what that cognitive vitality portion of our website does, it takes all those supplements and it rates them based on some true scientific criteria. Starting with, is it safe? Does it engage anything? Can you expect to get any benefit out of it? And it's just very user-friendly. And you can put everything in there, like red wine. It'll tell you about red wine, right? Or any of these over-the-counter supplements that go on, because we had a donor who just felt that was important for people to know. And on our staff, we're small staff, 30 people, 15 are neuro PhDs, and this is all they do all day, right? So it's a great place.
Well, like I said, I'm honored to be a member of the board and supporting the work that you're doing, Mark, you and Howard, and it's really terrific organization. We've got links in the show notes today if you are interested in visiting the site, to their website, and all the other content that is related to ADDF. Mark Rothmeyer, CEO of the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, thanks so much for joining us on the program.
Always a pleasure, Rick. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
How should you think about Bitcoin? Turn to a specialist. For 6 years, Bitwise has been helping investors access crypto. Bitwise manages the world's largest crypto index fund. They also offer 6 crypto ETFs. You get cutting-edge insights, expert Bitcoin research, and a nationwide team to help. Bitwise helps investors and advisors navigate crypto with confidence. Partner with a specialist. Look for ETFs backed by Bitwise. BitwiseInvestments.com. Carefully consider the extreme risks associated with crypto before investing.
Hey, we have a big webinar coming up on Monday. It is Monday, December 9th at 2 p.m., what the election results mean for crypto. Trump's going to be in the White House. Republicans are controlling the Senate. Gary Gensler is gone from the SEC. What does all this mean for the price of Bitcoin in 2025? What are the crypto allocations you ought to have in your portfolio? What should you be recommending to your clients? We're going to cover all of this in this event. Joining me is going to be Steve Kurz, the global head of asset management at Galaxy. We're going to show you the right crypto allocation for you and your clients, the investment options to consider. There's a lot more than just Bitcoin and Ethereum, know what I mean? Whether you should buy the Bitcoin ETFs or buy directly from Coinbase, whether you should choose active or passive strategies. You're going to love this webinar. It's free. The link to it's in the show notes, and you get 1 CE credit if you're an advisor. And then the very next day, my goodness, we're always piling on here. On Tuesday, December 10, 2 p.m. Eastern, the Retirement Revolution, the ETF solutions you need for modern retirement planning. Andrew Nelson, the Director of Product Strategy at Innovator ETFs, is going to join me to talk about how you can protect and grow your retirement assets, what to expect from the stock and bond markets next year, the new risks for investing for retirement, and we're going to show you how you need to reevaluate your retirement strategy due to what's going on in the world these days, the new risks when investing for retirement, the viable strategies you need, and the 2025 market outlook for stocks and bonds. Tuesday, December 10, 2 p.m. Both of these events next week, they're both free, 1 CE credit each. You can register by using the links in the show notes. And goodness gracious, the clock is ticking. December 27th is my final podcast, but I don't want to lose connection with you after these 35 years, so click that link, subscribe so that we can stay connected and I continue to send you the information you need about the topics that really matter in the field of investments, personal finance. I'm glad you're with me here on The Truth About Your Future. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to follow and subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. And remember, leave a review on Apple Podcasts. I read them all. Never miss an episode of The Truth About Your Future. Follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast app.
How do advances in science, technology, and medicine translate into investment opportunity? Listen and learn.
This is The Truth About Your Future with Rick Edelman.